See if that works. Okay. It looks like streaming now. The name's Ramirez, frogbear.zil, you know me. Uh don't know what happened with the internet right now. That was very interesting. I'm gonna close the garage. Okay. Everything looks perfectly fine now. So I decided to name this stream Why I'm Not Afraid of Everything Being a Lie. Um it's the thrill of the chase. To just answer the question from the very get go, for me, it's the thrill of the chase. For me, it's the thrill of knowing that everything I knew was a lie. Everything that I was taught, everything that I encountered, I find that fascinating. And it does not discourage me at all that it doesn't put me in an odd place. If anything, it's like reading a new book, it's like reading a new novel. So I get to rediscover everything that I'm not allowed to know. Right? People are always doing things that they're not allowed to do, right? There's this there's this whole fetishization of like, ooh, my heart's beating. Ooh, I'm doing something I'm not supposed to do. This reminds me of an ex-girlfriend I didn't know who was entirely crazy. Um where it was just like I had one perception of this person only to find out that there were other aspects of this person I didn't know. And I found it quite baffling. Like, why do you want to do all these things under these circumstances? For what? For you to get a heart race? You to. Right? It's a constant thrill chase where you're chasing a thrill and you're chasing these new bars of expectation. So it's like you're chasing the dragon. And if nobody knows, chasing the dragon is a reference coming to drug addiction. In the sense that you're constantly chasing this experience that you right you knew of, you were aware of, but now because every dose that you do, that dragon keeps getting further and further away from you. So that's where we're at right now. But the inverse, people are not okay with knowing that the reality is a lie. And it's kind of why I found myself in a situation with I was around a few graduations, and I was just around normal people that it wasn't like, I knew the whole thing. It wasn't my place to do anything. It wasn't my place to say anything or do anything because, you know what I mean? These are motions that everyone has to learn. At least that's the way I see it. A great example was I was babysitting one of my nephews. Or no, I wasn't directly. I wasn't babysitting, but I was there, and me and my mom are having a conversation, and the he was trying to touch one of the pots, right? Because we're cooking, and my mom was like, "No, don't do that," and I told her, "No, let him at least figure it out once, what that feels like, because once you learn it, you don't unlearn it, right? You don't unlearn the process of what happens when you stick a fork inside of an electrical socket. You know what I mean? Like there are these things that you learn. Oh, I shouldn't do these things. I've been electrocuted. I've burned myself in multiple ways. I was a bit of a pyromaniac when I was a kid. But there are these things that you have to learn in order to understand what the baseline of your reality is, right? So with the way the current system is set up, graduation, being 18, going to high school, graduating, all of these things are a part of this life process. I have no business trying to tell these 18-year-olds what's up. I have no business trying to tell them like what they're about. Well, it's not like I didn't, right? So I was trying to explain to my niece, the dangers of like what happens when you go to college parties and this and that, and like, there are things that you can prepare people for. But with me being who I am and rocking the tinfoil that I rock, I find absolutely no pleasure in putting myself under these circumstances where I'm trying to prevent these high school kids from going into college. There's absolutely nothing I can do to prevent them from doing that. Mainly because it is a normal thing. It is now a marker of it's like a marker of adulthood where you have to go to college, you have to go to university, and you have to experience these things in your life. I'm not sure what people think, but I don't know. I had no business trying to tell any of my nieces or any of my nephews that you should prepare yourself for these aspects of life. That's not my part. That's not right. I'm an uncle, but I'm not their parents. And you know what I mean? Like every kid is in a different situation in life. And I had a lot of thoughts recently about why I'm so okay with everything being wrong. A great example of this is Thomas Jefferson, right? The guy on the $100 bill, the electrical kite, right? How he was flying a kite and how it got electrocuted. Well, that experiment never happened. That was a whole lie. That whole thing is a lie. Benjamin Franklin never actually did that. Benjamin Franklin? I said Thomas Jefferson. Oh yeah, Benjamin Franklin was the one with the kite, right? He attached like a key to it, then it got electrocuted, and that's how he discovered electricity. Yeah, that whole story was a lie. Now, why is it a lie? That's the important question. It wasn't that the experiment was never his idea. Like there are places that it was published, there were discussions of it, but that experiment never was done by anyone. And you know, I've it was just a random little documentary that I was watching that was explaining how how it was just a farce. But who cares, right? He lied about flying an experimental kite and this and that. But the reason why that lie is important is because where did the whole idea or the whole invention of electricity come from? Right? We know names like Nikola Tesla, we know names like Thomas Jefferson, who we used to accredit the discovery or at least the invention of electricity. But I think it becomes aspects of the false reality we live in, right? We assume that Martin Luther King was this great guy, but he was cheating on his wife. We assume Gandhi was this great person, but he was sleeping naked with his nieces. We assume, right, we are put these heroes in front of us, and we assume nothing but the best of these people, only to later find out that they weren't necessarily that great people. Like Teddy Roosevelt is a great example of this. People think he was a great person. In reality, he really wasn't. I'm not gonna get too into that because that's not what this whole thing is about. It's the whole thing is about how everything I've learned so far, thus far, has been a lie. And it's only been a lie that works and caters towards a very peculiar set of circumstances. And by that I mean, it's not that our world is a simulation, it's that our world is being simulated. There's a very big difference here. And people are like, "Oh, we're stuck in the Matrix, man." And it's like, no. It's a metaphor. You're reading the Bible again too fucking literally. And it's not just the Bible. It's like when you look at something like the Matrix and you're just like, there are a variety of ways you can interpret that movie. Because it's you could say it's symbolism for representing a variety of things, or it's just a story that tells of a narrative. Or basically what I'm trying to say is that, you know, the death of the author was the intention, right? Because the Matrix was a story that was robbed and stolen from this black lady, but it was stolen by these twins and kind of rewritten, and then they separated these things into like two different movies, which is the Terminator and the Matrix. So what meaning you can gather from these movies is whatever. It's relevant to whoever's watching it. But the way I saw the Matrix wasn't that we have some aliens controlling us, that we're stuck in this deep sleep program and they're harvesting our energies through incubation, right? Because we're in our incubators. It's a metaphor. Each of these incubators is a metaphor to how people live their lives. how they've been perpetuated this lie that each of their lives is an encapsulated movie. That's why they're all in different pods, because you are in your own environment. And in each of those pods, the simulation that you experience is far different. You live in your own bubble, you experience your own things. And it's that whole thing of, in our reality, we do have Mr. Johnson. And Mr. Johnson in our reality is, whoa, 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 you're not saying what we were taught. You better correct yourself. Did you not go to university? Did you not go to college? Did you not seek higher learning? And they've hijacked the perspective of what it means to be educated. They've hijacked that understanding of being educated or being somebody who is not ignorant, right? They've changed these ideas and what we should expect of these ideas. And yet people assume, because you have your good boy, you have your grade A student who followed every rule that the teacher had put in front of him, this and that. All I'm saying is, how do I say this? You're basically fighting a bunch of teachers' pets. But the teacher pet in this situation isn't a teacher's pet to a teacher or an institution, it's the government. It's to these unwritten rules that you should govern your life over, or at least these are invisible rules that you should live your life under. And if you try to peek out of this box, you were always constantly met with a variety of people that say, oh, you should be ashamed of believing this, you should be ashamed of believing that. Like, and the system itself fuels these arguments. It's why you were constantly seeing a next day update, right? The moment Trump, or at least during his presidency, anytime he came up with a new argument or anytime he came up with a topic, it was like within hours, you already had the news replying to things he was saying, because you got to get ahead of the story. You can't allow him to control the sphere of thought over these subjects. So the news constantly reacted to things he was saying. It wasn't just the news. It was also independent influencers on YouTube who were divided by a clear aisle. And when that clear aisle wasn't enough of a division, they needed to reinvent the conspiracy theorist term in order to belittle and demonize a very educated subsector group who were unbiasedly coming to conclusions. And because they were coming from conclusions from an unbiased perspective, well, they needed the news, the institutions, the belly of the beast needed to create a narrative to combat this narrative. So that's where it stopped being Q and it started being QAnon, because they couldn't just allow these two subsect identities to exist, which was Q and then Anon, because Anonymous has already been proven very problematic for the institution and for the system at large. Do you not remember Libya when the internet got shut down in Egypt? Who were the people that helped those people get back on the internet? So I'm gonna tell you right now, aspects of it were probably intelligence communities, but at the same time, this was like a 4chan movement that was done independently, and it was a grassroots movement. And those problems led to what we saw later in 2010, which was Occupy Wall Street. But again, because people are so obfuscated with QAnon and this and that and JFK and Jesus coming back, evangelical sectors believing in the end times, what they don't realize is you are a product of your belief system, which means you are a product of what you were taught. And by that standard alone, that means you are dictated by people who created narratives and strings of beliefs in order for you to adopt. If no one ever admits that these string patterns of our belief systems or of what we know, if it never comes into question that these are faulty and these are cooked and these are manipulated, you'll never go anywhere. You'll never move anywhere forward. None of this will ever move in a direction where it builds. I'm not too sure how to say that. it just won't build anything positive at all. Like anything anything that births or creates the conditions for strife, you should know that it won't work. The moment that you have to set up these divisive lines, you're working at a disadvantage. You're working the way they want you to work. And by they, I mean the financial institutions, the educational institutions, the multimedia conglomeracy institutions. Like, if no one's come up to speed and realized that these groups of people are working in tandem with one another, and they're also working in tandem with so-called grass movement groups of certain internet cults, no one will ever move forward, right? If we don't admit that aspects of religion are cooked in the sense that they're cooked in order to make you a useful idiot, we could say that, because now you're fighting blindly, right? It's why I trust nothing Jewish people say, especially if they visited Israel, because your perception of reality is built on a form of psychosis that is built on forms of PTSD. And you're not going to change my mind otherwise. When you subject large groups of people to those circumstances, only one thing happens. They become paranoid. They become... It dawns a very victim mindset mentality. Because does it not dawn on anyone that, like, we take loads of American Jewish people to Israel for them to experience a culture shock, and that culture shock only breeds more people who will birth these belief systems that are very set in stone. So when they come back to America and they begin to lobby or they begin to protest, they've created systems for these useful idiots to live and die for. And it's not just Jews. It's evangelical Christians. It's the Rust Belt of America. There are a variety of domes, these variety of pod-like realities that people are living that they won't step out of. And because they won't step out of, personally, I do not believe that this country is doomed. I believe the country will fix itself because now more than ever, people are learning the lie. Or lies, right? Plural. Because it's all coming from the same group of people. And once you start reversing that idea, you start understanding why we're looking at what we're looking at. And, it comes down to this whole thing of, we have American people who believe that America is this great and holy thing, right? It's the same thing when you had Romans living inside of their own empire who believed that the Roman Empire was this great, fantastic thing. But don't you ever realize that any meaningful critique of any of these systems doesn't exist? It's almost like people want to control your perception and your ideas of these things. Not to bash on anything, but again, I'm very comfortable with knowing that I live in a lie. I'm very comfortable with knowing that everything I've ever learned and everything I've ever experienced is a lie. Who cares? That's a better place to be than trying to live in this psychotic state where I'm trying to constantly hold on to all of these lies, where I'm constantly trying to fight against truth or, working towards a better future. It's this whole thing of like, if you're aware, you're aware, obviously. But if you're not aware and you've just been living this lie, you live life experiences like I see with people here in the hood. Well, they'll think that they're lacking because they didn't have these experiences of college or they didn't have these experiences of life. And I look at them and I'm like, you are far more experienced than the people you think have the experience you're lacking. Like, you have way much more to offer society as a whole than some of these educated people do in their entire lifetimes. And I find that baffling. We've had cultural shifts, and one of the biggest ones is one of the funniest things that I can't remember what I was watching, but something very interesting was said about how women think that the world's run by the patriarchy and this and that, and I'm like, you actually have to force women into very difficult positions. Like, not all women want to work a construction job. Not all women want to work plumbing jobs. But if we were to institute these equality brackets into these aspects of field, none of them would ever want to do their job. And I think a great example of this is looking at how many 18-year-olds are deciding to make OnlyFans instead of trying to pursue a career. Because they, at least the way I see it, is my generation of females, right? The females that I grew up with while I was growing up. Most of them chose career paths because they wanted to avoid what they saw growing up, which was single motherhood and how this and that, you're left with nothing and da 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 da. Variety of things, right? They follow their careers. But not a lot of them would do like sex work or go into the pornography field. But now that it's more accessible, now that it's easily accessible, and now that people can just load onto this, notice how because of the what do you call it, the ease of use factor, what decisions are the newest generation of females making? Are they making decisions that are based on their career, based on 10 years in the future? Or are they making decisions based on, I'm going to live life forever and you only live once, right? Like you only live once model, where who cares about this? Who cares about that? There's no repercussions to any of my decisions. Like, now more than ever, you have females running around with their lives like it's a video game. And hey, I'm not saying that the men are exempt from this, but it's manifesting a bit differently. For men, in like, let's take large city sectors because it allows for the most stupidity to happen. Men nowadays are driving cars at an excessive. By excessive, I mean, look at takeovers. Look at the donut scene. Look at how many of these young kids are now going to these takeover scenes just to have fun with their cars. How many of them are getting into accidents? How many of them... There are aspects of men who are living their lives like it's GTA or Forza, and they're racing these cars, and they're putting themselves in grave danger. There's a very big difference, right? Men will put themselves in danger, but the kind of danger that kills, while women will put themselves in the sense of danger that no one really knows what will happen 10 years from now. Nobody can really guess what's going to happen 10 years from now with all these new 18-year-olds making the decision to go with OnlyFans instead of a more appropriate career path. I don't really give a fuck about that. Do what you will do with your life, but there are these consequences that come with making decisions. Any life decision comes with consequences. And now, like, all right, so at least this episode's called Why I'm Okay with Everything Being a Lie. Well, one of the biggest lies that is currently going on right now is how we're essentially feeding into this hypersense. I'm just going to call it hypersense, where regardless of whatever situation you're in, we've all developed these hypersenses of what to expect for whatever situation you're in, right? And we're constantly feeding into it. So you have, I guess, a great example of this is how females will lie to each other and compliment one another. And that'll have a detrimental effect based on whoever's getting gassed up. Like gassed up, oh my God, you're so pretty, you're this, you're that. One of them would be for fat chicks, right? Where you can gas them up, you can boost up their ego. But if you do that in a non-positive reinforcement way, all that happens is they get stuck in their ways. They get stuck with the shitty diet. They get stuck with the shitty habits. And this multiplies, not just, look, I might be using females, but you could do this exactly with the male too. You can manipulate anybody. It all depends on what kind of tactics you're using. We live in a world where neural programming language is neural programming language, where there's an entire field of study in psychology where it teaches you how to use words in order to incite these certain emotions or these certain ideas into people. That could really be detrimental to their health. Don't look at me, look at NXIVM. NXIVM was this really weird woo-woo cult where they hired one of the lead experts of neural programming language. And you should look into that because holy cow, That alone, that whole experience, or not a whole experience, but there's a really good documentary on Showtime talking about Nixium. But it goes to show you how easy it is for you to create these social environments to create this like it's like a grid control for women. I'm not saying that this is good. I'm just saying that's what Nixium was doing. Nixium was creating these social events where they would basically entrap these women into certain belief systems, where then they would put them in situations where they would now pick the new group versus their family. And it's all manipulation, emotional manipulation, social manipulation. Either way, it gets absolutely crazy when you look into how the reality we live in isn't what we think it is. And everyone's being lied to on a variety of different ways. What we expect of relationships. Most of our understandings, or at least this is a perspective from like an average person, where most of our expectations of love and or relationships are built off what we see, of what we read in forms of entertainment. So if you're into fan fiction, that will largely shape your ideas of what kind of romance you want. If you're into those erotic novels, if you're into whatever romance movies you see in rom-coms, these things or these forms of media will affect the men by and large and the women by and large. It's why, I guess an example I could use is Japanese manga will use big titty anime girls, and why Hollywood movies will use nice, bulky, handsome men with nice chiseled jaws. The market knows what the market knows what people want, right? And they'll add these aspects into the entertainment that they're weaving without, you know what I mean? Like, I should actually preface this. If you knew enough psychology, if any normal citizen knew enough psychology, none of these techniques or tactics work on the populace. None of them would. Because the educated individual would realize, oh, this marketing commercial is using this tactic. Oh, this person is speaking to me with a very peculiar vocabulary because they want something out of me. So, because none of that is ever taught in schools and none of us are ever well equipped enough to know the intentions of people, and I don't know if that's a concept that people would understand, we're all susceptible to getting lied to. There's this really great movie. I can't remember, but I think it's Ricky Gervais who's in it. Fat chubby dude. Pretty sure it's him. Where the whole movie is about how this world, this existence of this world, nobody's ever lied. Then this dude is the first person to figure out that he can lie to people. Right? That movie is actually pretty fantastic because it goes to show you that at least the way I see it, America at one point in time was a very high trust society. It was this society or this culture was bred in a very specific, peculiar way where they just had nothing but trust for anything and everything, especially if it also came from a fellow American who looked just like them. So I always love asking the question of, and I always ask these questions, or I used to ask these questions towards people who were wingnats, people who were sympathetic to the neo-Nazi movement, because I knew a lot of them back in the day. And I'd always ask them, like, do you think that, right? Because they would always tell me that, like, all white achievement is their achievement, and how there was no distinction because they were all the same race and genetically they were superior and da 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 da. And I would always ask them, like, if that was true, then why did your ancestors who control America, who were primarily white, why did they allow the country to be taken over in the way it was? I thought they were superior. I thought that none of these manipulation tactics would work on them. And of course, I'm just pointing out logical fallacies, right? I'm just pointing out if X, then Y. Then if we put X through this circumstance, the result's different to this result. Like, why is that? Nobody would ever like that because I would point out that we like to say these things, we like to believe these things, but in reality, you're just being a useful idiot for a different subsector. You're being a useful idiot for a different portion of this civil. At one point in time, I used to think it was a civil war. Now, more than ever, it's not a civil war. This is a global institutional war where it's clearly obvious where the dividing line is. If you haven't figured out, right, I was actually having this conversation with somebody else before, and they were trying to say that like all cryptocurrencies were a part of the World Economic Forum and how Klaus Schwab was in complete control of all of these cryptocurrencies. And I looked at him and I was like, that's not true. Because if that was true, then why would they act in ways that are contradictory to what you're saying? Right? If cryptocurrencies, we were specifically talking about XRP and Stellar Lumens, right? Now, if you don't know why these two cryptocurrencies are considered the new world order assets, you got a whole bunch of research to do, right? But here's the funny thing with that. If they were the new world asset, then why did they have no help at all until 2018? Why did these two American companies who are working to develop cryptocurrencies, why were they completely unhindered for so long up until 2018? You should really ask yourself, who's Jay Clayton? You should ask yourself, who's Hinman? You should ask yourself, why is the playing field the way it is? Why was the CEO of Ripple using the same vocabulary and the same vernacular as Trump when talking about the economy, when talking about how unfair and unjust our infrastructure is? Why? You know, this is a giant litmus test. If you can't pass it, it's not my choice. I'm not going to give you the answer. If nobody can find the answer for themselves, then I have no reason nor rhyme to tell you. Either way, again, I largely believe aspects of this cryptocurrency market were developed by DARPA programs. And, you know, I kind of brought this up with somebody before where it was just like, this is a country that has black budget programs. You'll never really figure out, like, right, aspects of crisis actors, aspects of how people get controlled through narrative or cultural standards, like any of this stuff. We'll never really figure it out until way later, until like it's either too late or there were, right, like what we're looking at now, where we're seeing all forms of institution. And when I say all forms of institutions, I'm talking about FEMA, I'm talking about IRS, I'm talking about police departments, I'm talking about education systems, I'm talking about anything that gets government money. Anything that gets government money is working towards a singular direction. All of it's working towards a singular direction. Like, doesn't it seem funny to you that or at least for me, this is fucking hilarious to me, we're looking at people who consider themselves liberal, people who consider themselves leftist, people who consider themselves champions of civil liberties. Like, you're now seeing these so-called champions of civil liberties proclaim and promote segregation. Like, how have we gone so far that people who I was speaking to who were white neo-Nazis, who believed in segregation, who believed in sending people back to where they came from, are now in line and are exactly the same like liberals. They're believing the same things. And I'm just kind of like, do you not see that you're now partners in crime? Do you not see that there is no distinction between both of you because you've chosen identity far above everything else? And when you choose an identity above logical arguments or being able to distinct between fallacies, when you've chosen identity above all, you get into this whole thing of like, oh, you're no true Scotsman. Like, it was a civil war that happened in Scotland and this and that, and basically, if you disagreed with any of their leadership, they would literally tell you, well, you're no real true Scotsman, so I shouldn't really listen to you. There's this constant tactic that was used everywhere. So it's kind of like the Mr. Johnson thing. Oh, whoa, whoa, whoa. You don't believe in NASA? What are you, a flat earther? And it's just like, they make these giant leaps of logic where it's just like, no, 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 no. I just don't trust NASA because they haven't done anything meaningful at all. At all. They haven't developed a new piece of tech in how long? Meanwhile, we saw somebody from the private sector do it all all by themselves. I don't know. But there is a very good counter argument to why NASA hasn't done anything meaningful, and it's because it's a government organization. And anything a government organization does falls under the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA. And if you aren't aware, right? Basically, this happened a while ago. I want to say the early 2000s, where there was there was a clear understanding on the behest of people in the Pentagon and people in the Department of Defense, where they started realizing, and they were like, all of these people are getting really educated in what FOIA requests are. Maybe we shouldn't allow government budget programs to do these. Maybe we should allocate government budgets for private companies to do these things. And then it gets easier to circumvent FOIA requests because the patent or the development of that technology is no longer in the government purview. So that means FOIA requests don't apply to private companies, etc., etc. Levels of obfuscation. Probably shouldn't have done that. Yeah, damn, I fucking talked for quite a while. Just complaining and bitching about all this shit. Lies. It's so great just to discover like why lies exist. Because you end up figuring out like, oh, you're lying to me in this peculiar fashion because you want to obfuscate, in the example of Benjamin Franklin, you obfuscated the truth of the invention of electricity because you don't want to admit how old electricity is. And if you get into, and I'm not even going to talk about Tartaria, that it's this real thing, but there are aspects to, people who research Tartaria and people who research alternative history. They have a lot of valid arguments when it comes down to, hey, some of these maps don't add up. Some of the effects of some of the things that were supposed to happen during this time period to this time period take a few hundred years. So why is this map dated this and this map dated this? Something happened? So you create a lot of these circumstances for what mysterious thing could have happened. And when you allow for that, a religious zealot's going to tell you, oh, God unleashed his fury. Or a scientist would be, maybe there was great floods, maybe there was great this or that, or climate change. People will find and work from conclusions. They won't work from fact-based points because, people have their own motives. People have their own agendas in these situations. And, when the majority of what do you want to call it? The institution who basically gets to handle all of these archaeological sites, when the entire world is governed by a single organization known as the Smithsonian, isn't it funny how all history has been right? All history works the way we think it works. Meanwhile, the Smithsonian just collects and never actually divulges any new information that comes out to the public. The only people who stay really educated on the lies that history has put forth are historians, are people who work in the education field, are people who were supposed to have our best interest in mind, but don't. I don't know. A lot of people don't find that funny. I find it fucking hilarious. Where like people will tell me like, "Oh, I trust my education. I trust in the system and this and that." And then I look at them and then I'm like, "Oh, so we're trusting the same scientists that believe that men can be women and women can be men? Like, are those the same scientists?" Oh, the field changes and new discoveries are made and this and that. And I'm like, we're talking about an institution who is supposed to have our best interest in mind, right? Let's talk about the medical field. And they're supposed to have our best interest in mind because there are all these unhealthy things in our life. And I always thought as a kid, right? This is when I was a kid, because I like sweets. They would always tell me, "Hey, you're not supposed to eat sweets. It's bad for your teeth." And I'd look at the sweet and I'm like, I live in America. Like, are you telling me that these companies can't produce a product that's like all right for me to just eat? And I think it was Skittles I was eating at the time. So the more, right, I got older, I learned and this and that. And you realize it's all a profiting scheme. It's like, hey, we're going to put all these shitty chemicals that destroy people's teeth. And then the people who benefit the most out of this is the dentist industry. And yet the dentist industry would much rather put braces on everyone instead of teaching them the correct way of allowing their teeth to set in place. And that comes down to jaw strength. It's mewing, Mewing, mewing. I can't remember the dude's name, but his last name is Mew, so that's why it's called mewing. Essentially, this guy discovered that he would get twins and would study how their teeth would position themselves purely based on the kinds of diet that each children exhibit. And it's actually pretty astonishing when you look into what, like, right, in America, we tend to eat a lot of soft foods. Because of that, none of us really developed strong muscular jaws. And, the only way for you to develop those sort of jaws is through constant chewing. And if we look at our ancestors or the past, the only circumstances that would allow for that to happen were meat. Meat. Meat is the only form of food that would allow you to work out your jaw muscles naturally. And what have we seen in the course of the last 40 to 50 years? Oh, we've been moving away from eating meat. Not only that, but for a good portion of those 30 years in that, they were trying to constantly modify the hormones and aspects of these animals through modification, GMOing, genetically modified organisms. And who allowed for, and right, there is a scientist who basically discovered something that really allowed for that industry to catapult forward. Anybody want to guess his name? Dr. Malone. Dr. Malone. Who's that guy? Is that the doctor that was invited on the Joe Rogan podcast that Spotify took down? Is that the scientist that was speaking against all of these different yibby yabs? Isn't that the guy who claimed he invented the mRNA? Like, all I did was listen to his story, listen to his background, listen to what he was all about, and that's what I discovered. Not many people are great at connecting the dots, but all I'm doing is I'm setting up logical arguments. X, Y, Z, like X plus this equals this. If X is under these circumstances, it doesn't equal this. All I'm pointing out is I'm just noticing things. That's all it is. And when I notice that there's this entire industry built on GMOing, and the guy who's trying to save everybody from medical malpractice, it's also the same guy that kind of like did a bunch of research into this very peculiar aspect of genetically modifying organisms. And essentially, what I can't remember what podcast it was, but Dr. Malone had a great section where he was talking about how when he was first developing this new subsector of technology for modifying organisms, he was talking about how there were other people also kind of working along the same field, but the other group of people that he was talking about were people who were trying to kind of splice aspects of different organisms into food because it allowed for this and it allowed for that and da 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 da. But back to my whole thing about government, the food industry, and all of these institutions not giving a fuck about your health, right? Think about all the most delicious shit we like to eat. And think about how unhealthy it fucking is. Think about how many chemicals are in that stuff. Yet, we live in a country that there's a great article by Vice. I would never fucking recommend an article by Vice, all right? But keep in mind that they wrote a really great article talking about fake sugar. aspartame, and they were talking about how it got how the FDA approved of it. And this is a Vice article where they're literally telling you, hey, this shit kills your brain cells. This shit does this. This shit leaves you infertile. This causes cancer, and this does this, and this does that under these circumstances. Yet, the FDA still approved of it. And not only did the FDA approve of it, but think about how many people who were big, fat, and overweight, who were trying to drink these diet sodas and these diet drinks and these diet snacks, thinking that they were losing weight, but in reality, they were poisoning themselves with aspartame. Like, and you're telling me that I should trust the government? You're telling me that I should trust Fauci? And you're telling me that I should trust all of these big form factors of government? And then people make this logical false argument where they're like, oh, but you trusted Trump. And I'm like, yeah, I trusted him because it was clearly obvious, based on what the institutions were doing, based on what the college sector was doing, based on what all these tentacles of government were doing, based on what those tentacles were doing, did not lead me to believe that Trump was one of them. And not even after he left office do I still believe that. Zion Dawn, man. You believe in Zion Dawn. It's like you're fucking retarded, because what happened when the next president came into office? What is the majority of his staff? Zionists. What did all of them do the moment Trump left office? They kicked back up all of the programs that were stopped during Trump, right? Trump stopped a bunch of Obama programs that Biden picked up. And basically, Biden reversed a bunch of other shit that Trump did. So, I've never seen that before. Maybe this was like when Obama took over from Bush. Obama promised that he was going to change everything, and how he was going to shut down Guantanamo Bay, and how he was going to make America better. But what did he do? Nothing. Absolutely fucking nothing. He pressed the gas on the fucking pedal instead. And the only time we never saw that happen, where the next person in line kept pressing the gas pedal, that didn't happen. And, people could sit there and, like, try to find all these logical arguments. And I'm like, dude, the person who got everybody to believe that Trump was a part of the Zionist cult is the same person now who's trying to claim that Putin is now this Zion asset. And how they're trying to pop up Putin into being this thing. And I'm just sitting here thinking to myself, you guys are... the superior whites in America are so great. And I'm just thinking to myself, you guys are fucking idiots. You guys will literally listen to anything as long as you say Hitler did nothing wrong and that he was just trying to do a good job. And I'm just like, you're telling me that the guy who was sponsored by the American banking cartel, you're trying to tell me that guy was a good guy? I'm like, please. Like, all right, here's something that people don't know. America had to manufacture the Zoot Suit riot. They had to manufacture this fake ass event in LA because they couldn't broadcast or show what was discovered in San Antonio, where the original Zoot Suit riot happened. You want to know what they discovered in San Antonio? They discovered American companies trying to funnel money into Mexico to allow the Catholic Church to then take that money over to Germany. I wonder why we never heard about that. Dude, people are so stupid. Like, oh no, I am standing in solidarity with my identity. And I'm like, history has shown us what happens when you put an identity above everything else. And you're going to repeat the same thing that destroyed Germany. And you're going to blame it on the same thing they did. It's like, for a big brain superior race, it's kind of funny how you can't see how you're just repeating a pattern that would only lead to the destruction of this country. Yeah, hilarious. And they're just as bad as socialists with utopia. We just need a utopia. If we get these circumstances, our utopia can happen. And I'm like, dude, all of you have been lied to. Everybody's been lied to, right? The people who want to live a normal life, the people who want to be a counter-revolutionary, and then the other side of the people who are countering that counter. And it's just like, all of you are the same thing. All of you are funded by the same group of people, and yet you don't realize that you failed the litmus test. Like you failed it, and all you did was put your identity above everything else. And that's the way I see it. So back to how this conversation all started with that dude that I was talking to who believed that all cryptocurrencies were a part of Klaus Schwab's idea. And I'm like, I had to tell him, like, the World Economic Forum, the only power they have over nations is economical. They leverage economies and the movement of money over nations, right? And these financial institutions are only allowed to do that because who allows them to do that? Anybody have an answer? It's called central banking. Central banking, by and large, is the reason why these financial institutions like the World Economic Forum have any leeway, have any meaningful power or flex over the populace. So understand that the World Economic Forum is just the financial sector of stuff. The institutions, the lenders, the borrowers, the central banks, that's who the World Economic Forum is. Beyond that, they have no power. Because you have to remember, economics is upstream from politics. If anyone's controlling the dam and that flow of river, it isn't the politicians. It isn't politics. It's business. It's the capital. It's people who have the money. It's people who have the means to make things happen. You have corporations that have bigger, you have corporations who have bigger budgets than the majority of the rest of the world. And you're trying to tell me that politicians rule the game. I'm like, bruh, you guys are fucking idiots. Like, and even these economic people don't have allegiances to religion. They don't have allegiances to none of this shit because they're all. Now, here's the thing. Here's the big kicker. You have to understand that in order for you to get to these positions of economic power, you need to be ruthless. It requires a very peculiar subset of a personality in order for you to survive in any of these bigwig meetings, for you to be a board member. If you are not like them, they do not want you in the circle. It's why the American Eugenics Society back in the early 1900s was a thing. All they were doing back then were just breeding people, and they were setting up matches between people in order to produce a better ruling class. And I'm not talking about purebloods. This experiment by no means expresses that any of these people that were a part of that program, that they were themselves nobility or the aristocrats. No. They just needed a boule. They just needed people to work the front side of things. It's why we need it. It's why we can say everything we want to say about Jeff Bezos, but at the end of the day, he has people he answers to, right? Kind of like BlackRock. BlackRock has so much voting power in all of the committees that they sit in. Why? Because they own the majority of these companies. Some of these companies own other portions of companies. So you can imagine how much voting power BlackRock can stack purely based on some of these decisions. And people talk about BlackRock, but people don't talk about State Street. State Street is literally a fund run by politicians. It was either politicians or something along the lines that State Street, by and large, is government money. So I'm just sitting there thinking, like, yeah, we want to talk about BlackRock, but we're not talking about how we have a government-owned trust that can also do things, and how they're always either in second or fourth place to BlackRock in all of these other company purchases. But hey, that's not my business. I'm just noticing things. Again, everything we know is a lie. And I think that's perfectly fine. I think it's better to work from that place than anywhere else, because in reality, at least that way you can start knowing where to go to the truth. Right? If what we are being told is a lie, then what's the truth? Because I think they're far more afraid of the truth than anything else. And I think that's why they're allowing us to kill ourselves through our food, through our entertainment, through the things we enjoy. it's quite a horrendous thing in my opinion. But at the same time, like there's so much that like understanding these things, you can move forward. You can build a better nation. But that's the thing. Currently, with being caught up in our identities, what we consider important, I don't know if we'll ever move forward that quickly, in my opinion. Crazy stuff, but fantastic. And I think I'm done. I don't know what else to talk about. Does that talk too much? I could talk about everything that's a lie extensively, like our diets, right? But that's enough. I want to say thank you for showing up. This was Ramirez in another installment of, I don't know what to call these. Either way, frogbear.zil for, I still don't have a website up for it. Look, I'm like stuck learning so much. Like I'm trying to learn special effects with Blender. I'm trying to do this with the, not After Effects, but the equivalent to DaVinci Resolve. I'm just stuck. I'm stuck learning. So learn some more, because